All right, so I want to welcome everybody who might be watching this, probably very hard to watch thing when it's done, to session 2 of I Agree with John as we brainstorm John chapter 6 through 10, as we plan to preach that in the Sundays leading up to Easter 2023. And we've got people from the Midwest and the South and the East and even London today with us. So grateful you guys could be here. I want to start just to give us kind of an agenda of what we'll look through today. First, just kind of check in. How's it going? And then we'll look at the overall theme for these chapters. For our last theme, we had meeting Jesus again for the first time. That was the first 5 chapters of John that we're still in. And so we'll talk about that. What theme do we want to use? What did you guys see as you look through these chapters? And then we will brainstorm chapter by chapter. So that's 5 brainstorms, and we'll get through it. And I think we'll be able to get through it quickly, but with a very thorough and good start for these sermons. So first of all, if a few of us want to share, how's it going? Is there anything that you thought, hey, this would really make this better if we did this or that? What do you guys got?
I can share. I'm loving preaching through John. I enjoyed what we did last year, but going through a book of the Bible has been awesome. Our church is excited about it. And we handed out those journals to all of our Bible Talk leaders at our workshop at the beginning of the year. And then we sold them for $5 to everybody else. And people bought them. We almost sold out the first day, and people have been reading through John and journaling. And I just love preaching Jesus. It's been refreshing for me because it feels less reactive to all the stuff going on right now, and just like, here's Jesus. I really appreciate the work that you guys have done in getting your stuff ready on Tuesday. I'm working on my timeline. I have been starting my sermons around 8 p.m. Saturday night once my kids go to bed, and so I'm working on scaling that back so I can join in and get one done on Tuesday. So your guys' work is helping me. So something that could help would be people like me being less of a free rider and making sure that that I sign up for one of the days to do the lesson. So looking forward to put my name down there. But really, really been loving it. So thank you guys.
Amen. Yeah, I love what you said about how it kind of takes us, to Jesus and not the things that are going on or like things that feel pressing. And yet at the same time, it's amazing how Jesus seems to be the answer to all of that stuff. So very cool. Any other thoughts going in? How's it going? What could be better? Yeah, Josh.
Yeah, it's been real good so far. I feel like the congregation has jumped on. I've been sharing the podcasts that go along with the with wherever we're at in John. I've been throwing that in the group chat for the church. Yeah. We also gave out the journals. So people like that. I did kind of like a Oprah Winfrey thing. I was like, look under your chair because you've got one. And they were not as excited as I thought that they would be, but yeah, they all got one and started using it. And so that was fun. I don't know. I just feel that it's great to not be siloed off and just doing our own little thing. I know that this group is working together on this, and so that's been helpful. There's just so many levels of engagement. So there's some people who are doing all the things. They're doing the daily devotionals, listening to the podcast, engaged in their life group, their small group discussions, and it's all based on the same thing. And so they're loving that. And then the folks that are not super engaged, though, like they can see that if they want it, it's there. And even just that, like that raises the bar for everybody, just to know, like, oh, if I wanted it was right there. I don't know. I think that's helpful. But yeah, I'm loving it. I'm looking forward to the whole year. I'm grateful we're doing it.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, if you guys don't follow the Springfield, Illinois church that Josh leads, he does such a good job with Facebook and Instagram putting up the stuff. And it's a really small church, so there's not even that much engagement with it. But he's like doing it. And I think a real model for those things. So that's great. Yeah, Ryan, what you got?
All right. So observation, not a criticism, but like I'm sure we all have our preaching style. And I just can't figure out how you guys are doing this full chapter on Sunday thing. So I'm more of a give me 5 verses and that's more than enough. And we'll just kind of use that. So that's been tricky. So I found myself rewriting sermons. Please don't take that as a criticism. It's just, I don't know. I've always had this issue of I can't take someone else's sermon, especially if I haven't heard it and I'm just reading it. I have the hardest time making that my own. I have the hardest time making my own. So I'm finding myself, the trap that I'm finding myself is I'll be on like Friday and I'm like, all right, let's dig into these notes. Let's see what I'm preaching. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to have to like rework. I don't know how to do it. So I don't mean that as a criticism because everybody's got different styles, but for me, that one's been a bit of a challenge is how do I, and I'm kind of curious, do you guys do that where you just like read the whole chapter? As that's a little bit foreign to me. I'm more of a, just give me a paragraph or two and we'll focus in on that chunk. So I don't know if that helps or not, but that's kind of my how I roll.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think we all have different styles, and the goal is for each of us to write our own sermons. But it's not to make it easier; it's to make it better. But to make it better in a way that's easier than getting a preaching degree or something like that. That we could do it together. So that is the goal. And you can preach all of. I think the sermon you sent us was the full chapter though, for John 4. Right. And so
I tried to stay unified. Well, it was one story. That story was just really long, but yeah.
And that's going to happen in these next chapters too. The chapters themselves are divided into one story in a lot of ways. So maybe it'll be easier, but that's really good. Any other thoughts? I'll take one more if we got them, or we can move on. Let's move on. And okay. So just real quick, just a collaboration, integration. Josh talked about the kinds of people that some people are doing all the things, some people are doing some of the things, some people are maybe like almost doing more things. I think that this next set of chapters is really going to call people to do more, to be more devoted. It really seems like what Jesus is getting at. And so cool thing is we've got all of these ways that people can be more engaged. And I know the daily devotionals have been really well received in Lansing, and people are getting a lot out of those. What do you guys see with that stuff? Like we've got iagreewithjohn.com, daily devotionals, the midweek small group stuff, even like the group me that we're using. I think that's been great. Thank you, Josh, for setting that up. The graphics that we used last time, we'll make new graphics for this next one. Are the sermon starters adequate? Anything? Yeah. What do you see, Phil?
Well, one, it is a lot of stuff. So I think initially when I wasn't paying enough attention, it's hard to figure out everything until you really, so it took a good amount of time. Honestly, it would have been easier if I'd just called you and been like, give me the lowdown so I don't have to read all this. And and I know I missed the second half of the first one, so that was maybe part of that. And then I think even it'd be nice to see a little bit more, as people just even put together their sermons. And I appreciate what James is saying, or not James, but Ryan is saying, and James is seconding, like, even though our sermons are all different, if we put a PowerPoint together, like there's a folder, you can share it and put it in there. And that way we can even, unfortunately, if we're waiting until Saturday night to do our sermons, it can feel a little bit weird to do that. But anything, we can do to share that sounds like it might be helpful. As I've noticed, some people are like, hey, is there any more of like, slide graphics, anything that we can add to this? And I don't have anything for chapter 4 yet as far as graphics, and we just had our 40 year, so I'm actually a week behind, so I feel like I'll be able to benefit from whatever I glean from what has been shared the previous week. But anyways, I thought that was one thing I was noticing too about this. That's
great. I think if you guys can, even if you get your sermon done Thursday or Friday, it would be great to throw it in the folder. Just put your name in parentheses afterwards. And then, if people are stuck, they can look at your notes and or get that little piece of inspiration. We basically have the Holy Spirit working on 9 people through this text instead of just one. So I think the more you throw in the folder, whether that's PowerPoints or sermons, the better this can be. So that's good. Other thoughts? Anything else with collaboration? Stop, collaborate, and listen.
Hey, I just wanted to say, Joel, the daily devotionals have been super encouraging, and I know people have been really receiving that well. And just it's I send the link out every Monday just as a reminder to everybody that it's there. And I think that weekly reminder, because people forget, and then it makes it easy for them. So I send it out to our group me so they see it. And then, I do some D times with brothers here and there, and it's just easy to jump into that and do that, a little devotional. So I just want to say a big thank you that you've been doing that, providing that resource. That's been really helpful.
Yeah. Amen. That's great, Arlie.
I had one thing that might be helpful.
Yeah.
And that's if someone is referencing a like some sort of point for that's kind of from a scholarly article or from a something that basically kind of needs to be verified. Like, I take you guys at your word when I'm looking at the notes, but it would be helpful just for all of our integrity's sake, even if you took like a picture with your phone of that section highlighted or something, if it's a paper Bible or something, and myself included when it's my turn, or like a link to this article, because there's been some really cool stuff, but I've just been like, ooh, how do I know if that's true, or I want a little more information? I think that happened on the chat earlier today or yesterday. So if there's a way to, not full bibliography, but cite something, I think that would help all of us pull from those other resources too.
That's great. Yeah, I'll have to stop making things up, but then we'll do it. That sounds good. Fantastic. All right, let's move in here. So moving on for our theme for John. So, the whole year is I agree with John, but it's really hard to do a year-long theme. And so we have these micro series within it to keep people engaged, keep it fresh. And so John 6 through 10, when I read through this, a couple of things. I thought that the Jesus diet would be a cool theme. Part of that is because it's the season of Lent, but our churches don't really do a whole lot with Lent, but culturally that's happening around us, and that's a food thing or a lack of food thing, that kind of thing. But you just see a lot in the text about being nourished and sustained by Jesus. That's basically what he's saying in every single chapter. Chapter 6 with like the manna, the feeding of the 5,000. Chapter 7 is all about living water, and then you've got the light. Are you blind or can you see? That's light is definitely a sustaining thing. And then the shepherd taking care of the sheep, and then his word in chapter 8. So every single chapter there's something like that. And I think it kind of, the flip question then that I think would come into a lot of the preaching here is, if we aren't being sustained by Jesus, then what are we trying to fill ourselves up with? And you can see the other people in the interactions that Jesus has trying to fill themselves up with all kinds of things that aren't Jesus: religious pride, sin, unbelief, all those things. And then a thought I had with it would just be, we could, instead of having practicals at the end of each lesson, we could have recipes. And so like, here's a recipe for living water in your life, or here's a recipe for whatever. So that's a thought I had, kind of half-baked at least. Do you guys have any other thoughts? What you thought would be a theme? Does that sound good?
Yeah, I thought that theme was already decided, so I'm
Okay.
on board.
All right. Cool. And then when we make the graphics, it'll reflect that, like it'll look kind of like cookbooky, kind of thing, or food. And I just like food, so I think it's just better if we do that. So, any other thoughts for like an overall, before we get into John chapter 6 here, which we're almost there, we're almost getting into this thing. Any other overarching thoughts as you thought about these chapters?
Yeah,
Right.
I can go. Sorry, I was good pausing, but I just I was so fascinated by how many times Jesus has to explain who he is, and how many times people are like, but who are you? And there just seemed to be this like, it felt like I was reading a game of Guess Who. But are you this person? And then you flip it down, and there's just this. His identity is all through the pages, and I thought this particular stretch of text, probably more so than any other that I can think of, has so much back and forth between Jesus and other people, and a lot of red, and not as many miracles as some of the other chunks, and not like John 14, 15, 16, 17, where it's just all red. But it's just this back and forth, like, but they said you're this, and who are you? And even I just thought it was interesting, and the idea of don't miss Jesus, or the right Jesus, or not to take away from the Jesus diet. I think that's the way to go. But just in all of it, the idea of missing it. And I think to your point of how many times you can go to the wrong thing instead of Jesus. It's just so easy to do, to the wrong Jesus, to the wrong God. So that was my kind of takeaway reading all those in one chunk.
James, that's great. Thank you, brother. Yeah, Phil.
So I think for me, specifically chapters 6 through 10, I thought of two keywords: recognition and relationship. And that was kind of what stood out to me each time. And so those, but I'm kind of with James. I think it is tough to put one theme on these particular chapters, the Jesus diet. And we just did meeting Jesus again for the first time, but I think recognition relationship is what I saw over and over in chapter 6 through 10. Even when you get to chapter 8, there's the whole issue of paternity, like who is Jesus's father, who is their father. And so, anyways, that kind of stuck out really strong to me.
Yeah, I think that's great. All right, I'm salivating. I'm ready to dig in. I'm using words that reflect food references. Let's do this thing. John 6. Let's brainstorm it out. Does somebody want to kick us off with the brainstorming on this?
Jewel, can I ask a quick question before we jump in there?
Yeah.
So the free week right before that, what
Yes.
exactly does that mean?
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Rusty. That's great. So one thing to commit to a year-long schedule is tough. So, I put it together with free weeks, recognizing that we're going to have guest speakers. We're going to have to, do services with other churches, all that kind of stuff. Or maybe you just need to preach on something topical because something's going on in the church. And so that's a week you can use for whatever you want, but that week can move. And so for me, actually, it's moving. I'm going to be ahead of schedule, and I'm not going to use my free week until March 5th. And then I'll be back on the schedule. And so there's just built-in skip days. And so if you don't need to do that, you could preach more, John. You could go deeper or whatever you want to do. You could have a guest speaker on, every so often, which is a great idea. But that's what that is. That's a great question, Rusty. Okay, so what do we see for John chapter 6? Jesus feeds the 5,000, then he walks on the waves, and then he declares himself to be the bread of life. That's a big chapter right there. In fact, it's got a lot of verses in it. Anybody want to just kind of kick us off? We'll probably spend 7 minutes on each chapter here, brainstorm this thing. Anybody want to kick us off with just a general, here's what I thought as I went through that chapter?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing to me, I like kind of the I am statements of Jesus, and saying I am the bread of life. And, obviously that connecting with feeding the 5,000. But I just, you see Jesus time and time again connecting these physical needs to the spiritual needs. And, even feeding, and then they were like, we want more food. And he's like, I have food for you. Do you really want this food? And it's spiritual food versus physical food. And a lot of people didn't like that idea. They wanted just physical food. but Jesus says, I have something way much more that's going to be better for you. And so I don't know, I just connecting the spiritual with the physical, understanding hunger physically, understanding hunger spiritually.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think with that, so at the end of chapter 5, there's a lot in all of these chapters actually about Moses, way more than I had ever seen before. Yeah, I always think of John as more of the Hellenistic, less Hebraic gospel writer, but nope. So he talks about Moses in Deuteronomy 18:15 through 18. That's where Moses says that there's going to be a prophet like me who comes, and that's who everyone's waiting for, is this prophet. And so much of the illustration of feeding 5,000 like out on the hills, in the grass, and then him saying that he's the bread of life, he's making a claim, and this goes into that recognition and relationship thing I think Phil was talking about and James is talking about. He's making a claim that he is that prophet, and he's greater than Moses, and that his bread is going to, continue to sustain. Interesting with the leftovers too. Like when you look more specifically into that story, there's leftovers. There's more leftovers than there were when they started. There's more food afterwards, and it's a lot like when Jesus turns the water into wine. Like he saves the best for last. I think one practical with this maybe is we have in our society, like we believe in scarcity, like we don't have enough time, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough resources. But with Jesus, it's always going to be overflowing. And I think that ties in even to John 10:10, life, abundant life. There's no such thing as scarcity if our source is Jesus, if that's what our sustenance is. So just those sparked some thoughts for me, Carl, right off the bat there. What you got, Ryan?
So just a quick note from what Carl said. I thought that was really smart. One of the things that is crushing churches right now, I don't know if crushing is the right word, but it's on the rise, this whole progressive Christianity thing. And one of the big tenets of progressive Christianity is that the real gospel work is serving the poor. That's the real work. And true progressives would be like, the work we're doing, this whole salvation stuff, that's almost secondary. And I think one of the things I always use to answer that is exactly what you said, Carl. Like, whenever Jesus meets a need, a physical need, there's a spiritual lesson. And so all throughout here, there's going to be people blind, and Jesus is going to say, let me tell you about spiritual blindness. Oh, you guys want this kind of food? Let me tell you, my food is this. And so, yeah, we need to be all about helping people, but the true message needs to say the true message, that we're here for spiritual needs and salvation. So I always think those are good things to mix into these sermons.
Yeah, that's great.
It seems like too that he kind of kicks the miracles up a notch in John 6. not that the water into wine isn't cool, like I can't do that, but when the water's away and it comes back wine. It started as one thing, it came back as another, but this bread thing, like I'm kind of surprised John, because he seems like kind of a detail guy. Like when he and Peter raced to the tomb, he's like, oh, by the way, I won that race. I'm a little faster than, like, did we really need to know that? But he's like a detail guy. But you're seeing this little bit of bread and fish. Like, what did that look like? How like, it's not like it went away or it was pulling a rabbit out of a hat where you don't really see them. Like it's in front of you. Like you're not going to tell us at all, like what that looked like. Like, that's crazy to me. That miracle, like that's like, he's going for it. And then walking on the water, like, what the heck? Like he's in full force. The miracles are like, okay, we're on. I don't know what to make of that, but the miracles are different level.
Yeah. Yes. Any other thoughts on the feeding of the 5,000, and then we'll get into walking on water. Trying to see. I think the manna connection is a thing because Jesus has come from heaven.
I just throw in there, I don't know, Andrew, he's the one who brought the bread. It shows just him bringing his little faith. I think that's really something I want to emphasize, because I just feel like we have a lot of people have little faith, but hey, you bring it to Jesus and watch what he can do with it.
Yeah, that's really good. I had not thought of that. The other thing I think, just so you guys have the reference, Old Testament stuff that's going on, 2 Kings 4:42 through 44, that's where Elisha feeds 100 people with 20 loaves. So Jesus totally slam dunks on Elisha. And the Septuagint uses the same word for boy, like a little boy that had the loaves, the same word. So there's definitely like a connection there. And so it's like, so you see, and there's leftovers in that story. Leftovers with Elisha. There's leftovers with the manna every day, but they're not allowed to take the leftovers or have any leftovers. And then there's leftovers with Jesus. Like I think we don't think about leftovers as being a good thing, but it's actually a really good thing. Like it means you ate good enough that you can have lunch tomorrow. We have leftovers with Jesus. So cool. All right, let's talk about walking on water. And I think this is, so if we keep some Moses in mind here with the manna, Moses, Joshua, Elijah, and Elisha all parted water and walked through it. Jesus walks on the waves, walks on top of the water. And there's in Job 9 verse 8, it references that God, so not like one of God's servants or a prophet, God walks on the water. And so there's a claim to divinity in that. And then Psalm 77 and 78 talk about that as well. And then the other thing is when he says, "It is I," it's when, they're afraid, and he says, "It is I, don't be afraid." That is literally, I am. He says, I am. He says, "It's a me, a Mario, walking on the waves." No, I am. So any thoughts from that? I'm sure you guys have preached that a lot, but we're coming kind of from this lens of the diet, sustaining.
To me, I definitely think both signs here just reinforce what he's already said in chapter 1. He is the Logos. He has divine dominion over creation. And of course, he does the manna thing with Moses, and then he does a water miracle next. Just, Red Sea. And there's a strong connection there. And then yeah. Just reading Arlie's comment.
Mm-hmm. Steo, there we go.
Yeah.
It also seems apparent in this one that this is just for the disciples. Like this is a special, like he really wanted them. And in Matthew, it says he made them get in a boat. It doesn't just say they went out and got in a boat. He made them get in a boat. So he really wanted them to not walk around the sea at night. So this is like at night on a sea. Like this is scary. Like in a rowboat. Like this isn't in a yacht. This is scary stuff. And I'm sure he had to kind of coax them, but literally it says in, I think Matthew and Mark, it says he made the disciples get in a boat. You would have to make me go out at night when the sea is rough. You'd have to make me go out and do that. But he wanted the disciples to go through this, I think this near-death experience, as opposed to the bread that was for everybody. That's an everybody thing. This is just special. He really wants to help his disciples see who he is, and he puts them in this really dangerous situation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's good.
I like that. I like the faith of the unexpected that Jesus does. He does these unexpected things that, the bread, it would take a year's wages or whatever, like that's way too much. That's not possible. Walking on water, like what is like what we think sustains us, which is what we see, whether it is the amount of bread we have or the boat. Like the only way to cross this lake is the boat, and then here comes Jesus walking, and it's like, this is not what I was expecting at all. And Jesus constantly surprises, all the people around him, because he kind of, not that he does opposite just to be opposite, but he just does what's unexpected to be, pointing that he is the Messiah.
I love that. Like, you're going to need a boat. We're going to need a boat. And Jesus is like, nope, you don't need a boat. Side note, I went to the Sea of Galilee and I tried to walk on water. It did not work. So yeah, it's too bad. I got a picture though where I was standing like on a rock just below the surface of the water. And, it looks like it. Sweet. Okay, let's talk as he moves on from there. Which move on from there is kind of interesting because I don't know if you guys saw that, but it says when Jesus got on the boat, they were immediately on the shore. And so some people have said like that the word there is translocates, like a little bit of that's teleportation, Kyle. But that's probably doesn't fit in the scope of any of our sermons. If you can throw that in the sermon in a meaningful way, you got to share it with us, because that's something. Okay. So he goes on, and after that he goes back to this bread of life, and this is where the I am statement, I'm the bread of life, and gets into that with the Jews. And interestingly, so if we stick with the Moses theme here, verse 41, he says that the Jews grumble. It says they grumbled about him, and grumble is the same word they use for Israel in the desert. And so there's clear allusions to, I mean, he's proving who he is and that he's God and he's the prophet and all that stuff. So any thoughts on this part about bread of I'm the bread of life, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood. He brings eternal life if you eat it. Cannibalism. What do we got here?
Yeah, I mean, I love the clear connection, to the Israelites in the desert. And I thought of, Numbers 11, where the people are craving other food, and they're like, we want this meat, and and so I just thought about that idea of like, what do you crave? What do you crave, physically, but also spiritually? What are you craving? Is it things other than God? Is it things other than what Jesus is giving you? And you see God gives them this quail that was what they wanted, but was a big disaster, and it said they died because they craved other food. And I just thought about that spiritually. Spiritual death could come if you just crave anything other than Jesus. Are you hungering and thirsting for righteousness? Are you wanting Jesus? Or are you wanting other things? So
that's great. And then thinking about eating the bread and drinking the blood. Obviously, every week we take communion, but that can become such a stale. Like, is that the best meal of the week? Is that what's sustaining you? Or are you craving other things? I love that. It does make me want White Castle because I'm a dirty person, but that's good. Any other last thoughts before we move on to the next one?
Well, I think the verse 28 and 29, where it says the work of God is this, to believe. I think we've just got to keep pounding that, because the whole book of John, I mean, the biggest sin you can do is not believe.
Yeah.
Like, the book of John defines sin as unbelief. And that is different than a lot of books in the Bible.
Bro. Yeah, that's going to come in John 8 too, for sure. Yeah, Mulligan, you're on mute. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
So helpful, guys. Man, I just love to hear all of you preach. This is phenomenal. I just haven't had a chance to read through this because I just keeping up. But just one word jumps out of this last passage, and that's unpalatable. I just think about that for some, the gospel is unpalatable. It's not like, even to his disciples, someone said, like, will you do this? And they're like, well, eat blood, eat flesh, drink what, you know, and just the idea of discipleship being pretty unpalatable to a large majority of people. And that's okay to Jesus. He understands that. So that's just the word that jumped out.
I like it. That's a really good word and thought, even for the illustrations that we could have with this. So, okay, so if we,
sorry, real quick, I'll just
Okay.
say Isaiah 55, and maybe someone said this, I had to hop off, but Isaiah 55 has the line, why do you work for bread that isn't bread, I have to look it up exactly, but it's to me, it's so similar to what he's saying about stuff that spoils. He goes, come to you who are thirsty, you who have money, come buy, eat bread, wine, milk. And he says, why spend money on what is not bread and your labor on what does not satisfy? And I just thought, seemingly those seem so connected, but why buy bread that isn't bread? Why spend your money on what is not bread? Just came to mind, Isaiah 55 too.
awesome. Okay, I think we did some good stuff in all those verses of John 6. For a title, I don't know if anything sticks out to anybody for a title, key concepts, good point, all that stuff. I think that's stuff that we can fill out, like whoever is taking that sermon, like whoever's our Tuesday sermon person can work on title, key concepts, but those are things to keep in mind. So we won't do that right now. We'll just keep populating the brainstorm section. But I do want to highlight, though, in this brainstorm, there's extra notes. And for a couple of the sermons, I added extra notes that I got from different commentaries. And that's for all of us. Like under extra notes, you can at any time get in and be like, and add a thing. Like James said, add references as much as possible, but fill it up. And just reading through that stuff, I think so often just sparks really good ideas or connections or ways to say things. Like I wouldn't have thought of the word unpalatable, but it's coming. So very good. Let's move on to John 7 and brainstorm that. Does anybody want to kick us off with just kind of taking us through John 7?
Can I ask one more question while haven't hit 7 yet?
Let's go.
Why the heck wouldn't John talk about Peter walking on the water?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe it's that rivalry from running. He's like, if you know.
That's crazy to me. I mean, like you just talked about standing on the sea. If you would have walked, Joel, I would put it in my gospel. Like I'd be like, yeah, I saw him walk on the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah.
It would make it in there. I don't. Yeah, it's kind of.
I think it's intentional, personally, from what I've read.
Just that competitiveness that Joel's talking about.
No, not competitiveness.
I was joking. I don't actually think that's the reason. Yeah, go ahead.
No.
Okay.
I think the beloved disciple is highlighted in the book of John. He's the elder of that community, and Peter does get mentioned, and I don't think Peter gets a negative. Like there's nothing negative on Peter and John at all. The 12 are only mentioned a couple times. They don't even show up until John chapter 6 again. And so it's just, I think this book is deeply rooted in the Johannine community. And, and I think that it just really, the beloved disciple and his relationship, people aren't even sure if the beloved disciple is John. There's definitely some stuff in here that would make you question. There's some good evidence it could have been Lazarus or maybe some kind of co-writing thing like Mark and Peter. So there's a lot in the commentaries about that.
It's really good. If you guys are playing I Agree with John bingo, Phil just said Johannine, and that gives me a bingo. So I love it. All right, we're in chapter 7. Somebody take us through here. We're camping out. We're camping out in John chapter 7. Hopefully you get that reference.
Is that because it's the Feast of Tabernacles, Joel?
It's why, yeah, we're doing it. Okay, I'll take us through real quick then. Hopefully we'll get the flow of this. It'd be good. Like, so even now be thinking when we get to chapter 8, 9, and 10, if you're like, I can run us through 8 just to give us a baseline that we can all kind of jump off of. I think that's a good way for this, the brainstorming to work. So I feel like chapter 6 is all about food and chapter 7 is all about drink. And you got to have them both, right? You got to have good food and good drink. And they're both about Moses and the wandering in the wilderness. And we are all wandering in the wilderness. The people in our churches are wandering in the wilderness. So this is extremely relevant for us. But I see this chapter as like the thirst quenching chapter. And it fits with this Feast of the Booths, the Tabernacles Feast of Booths, because the men would create tents out of leaves and branches to commemorate the time that Israel slept under the stars, and they would do that for this festival. And so that's really cool. But it all fits, it all goes back to the wilderness and the wandering. And then the other thing that's kind of like the thirst quencher here, I don't know if you guys read much about this feast, but they basically had like a rain dance going on at this feast. And so Jesus, he goes up halfway through, and then on the last day is the greatest day. But I think every day they would have this walk from the pool of Siloam to the temple, to the altar, where the priests would walk and do a little thing and sing some songs, and then they would dump water out at the altar, because Jerusalem's in a very dry climate, and this is like a way for them to kind of do like a rain dance kind of thing. This was such a famous thing. I'll put a picture of it in GroupMe, but they actually have found pottery. Like, you could buy commemorative pots, kind of like you can buy I Agree with John merchandise at our Redbubble shop. But you could buy the pots. They found the pots highlighting this walk that the priests would do. The priests would preach, or the reference, if you want to read Zechariah 14, which is a pretty depressing chapter, but literally talks about from Jerusalem living water. So when Jesus says, "I'm bringing living water," he's referencing the same things the priests would have talked about that week. Ezekiel 47, 1 through 12 is also part of that. Hopefully someone's writing some of this stuff down. I'll fill it in. And so there's I think that's the biggest stuff I got of it, is just like it fits a lot with John 4 with the woman and wanting that living water. But yeah, that's what I have. There's a lot of reference to this festival that's kind of below the surface, and who Jesus really is, that he can claim to have living water. So what did you guys see in this? Got stuff with the brothers not believing in him, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, go for it, Josh.
Yeah, it seems that Jesus is opposed at multiple different levels throughout John 7. So he's opposed by his family in 1 through 13. And then he's opposed when he gets to the temple. He's opposed by the religious rulers. But yeah, there's a lot of opposition from different groups of people. Just a comment, something noticed in verse 7 or chapter 7.
Yeah, one thing I saw with the family opposition is, like in Luke chapter 2, when Jesus is 12 and goes to the temple, he goes with his family, they forget about him. But here, so when you go to these festivals, the 3 festivals a year at the temple, it would be customary to go with your family. But his brothers don't believe in him, and so they don't go together. That is a little insightful into just how much opposition that would have been, somewhat shameful of a thing. But then we've got the books of James and Jude, and we know that they became believers, kind of like Nicodemus too. You see, like at the beginning, they don't believe, but they become believers, and so they're named for that.
Yeah, I like the again, kind of the expectations. I think what I see here is, everyone kind of expected the Messiah to be kind of a certain way or a certain thing, because they're like, the Messiah wouldn't have come from this town. The Messiah wouldn't have done that. There's no way you could be the Messiah because of this and because of that. It was like this expectation that people had. And I kind of think about, what do we expect Jesus to be for us? Because we like Jesus being, or the Messiah being, a certain way. Like people probably wanted him to be this military leader. I'm waiting for this military leader to save us from Rome. That's who the Messiah is to me. Some people just wanted healing from whatever it is. If someone come and they just heal everybody, the whole world, there's still problems. So the Messiah hasn't come. Whatever it is that you name that you want Jesus to be, he is that, I think, but also way more. I think of all the names of Jesus. Jesus came as the Lord and Savior, the Redeemer, Light of the world, Bread of life, King of kings, and sometimes we expect Jesus to be only one of those things because we want him to be a healer, but in what way? What way is Jesus a healer? We want him to be our Redeemer. What is he going to redeem? Does he just automatically redeem everything that's ever wronged you? So I think people missed the Messiah. People missed Jesus because they wanted him to be something more or something different. And I think we can't miss Jesus because we might want him to be something different in our life, So that's what I got out of this chapter.
I really like that, Carl. I think because I think if we think of like maybe the big question, this could go on the recipe card, like the practical at the end of it, is Jesus refreshing? And that's, he claims to be this living water. And if he's not refreshing, then you might be looking at him wrong. I think of, and you can do, the illustration of lemonade on a hot day, or right now in Michigan, like a hot chocolate or a really good cup of coffee would be so refreshing, warming to the soul. And so, yeah, I think that's a really cool way of looking at it. Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
Well, I think along with James's comment in the chat, and then with what Carl was just saying, if there's a way to connect our theme to verses 1 through 10 in particular, you get the sense that his brothers are trying to force him to use a different recipe. They're like, go to Jerusalem, sure. It's like, they're like, go do this. And they're like, no, this is what you should do. And Jesus is like the master chef. And he's like, no, this. And so one, obviously there's the theme along with in John 2, he doesn't do anything prompted by anyone. He does it of his own accord, not according to man's plan or will, but just the idea that they're trying to mess with the recipe.
Yeah.
And Jesus is like, no. And then he goes anyways, but on his own terms.
I love all of those illustrations about food. And I think, yeah, they wanted him to be like an influencer and do what other people had done when they were building this following, and Jesus did it differently. It's really good. Other thoughts from this chapter? There's clearly references to Revelation 21 and 22, living water. That's the eschatological future of all of this.
I like verse 39 that we get these little moments where it seems like John is just going off on the side and like, oh, and he said this because of this, and he's like clarifying for the reader what's going on. Yeah. But it's even helpful doctrinally for people. I think in 39 now he says this about the Spirit, which believers in him were to receive, yet there was no Spirit yet. Like it's very clear. Like, okay, Jesus hasn't been glorified yet. Just so you know, he is the source of living water, and the Spirit will come from him. It hasn't happened yet, though. It's pointing towards the future. But I think this is a great point for encouragement, where we can even look back and say, look at these prophets who were talking about this and how it was going to happen. Like, eventually it was going to happen. And now we get to live in an era where we can have it. Like, that's, I don't know. It can be a really encouraging and inspiring side point.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think too, like in John 3, when he talks to Nicodemus, Jesus calls the Spirit a wind, and now it's living water, which would be, moving like a river. And then in John 14 and 16, he'll talk about the Spirit even more. But we keep getting these little like previews of the Spirit, and it's wild, it's uncontrollable, even dangerous. And I don't think that's what we think about when we think about being spiritual, but every time that's how Jesus talks about the Spirit.
I'll just throw in there, kind of tie this into chapter 6 too, but we're talking about health benefits, and I think it just ties into Jesus is the best diet, right? And he's the best food source, he's the best water source, but yet we want to go to all these other sources. I think especially today, there's so many talking heads out there, so many voices, but Jesus is still the best diet, the true source for best health. So I think that'd be cool to tie in.
That's great. That even ties in when we get to chapter 10 about the good shepherd, because people can get they can their diet can be all kinds of YouTube people or podcast people or whatever, but Jesus wants a flock. He wants that to be the place where you get him. So I don't want to forget to say that. Awesome. Okay. Any other last thoughts on John 7? Yeah, Mulligan.
Just like the phrase you used about him, what Carl was saying about being an influencer, just the way you tied it into feeding our eyes, social media. I think that's just a great comment. A little bit what Ryan was saying about the social justice movement or whatever. Just, that just what people are feeding their minds and their eyes through what they watch, what they allow to influence. And I think, to speak to our teens and others, that's just great language. So I just wanted to echo what you were saying.
Awesome. Very good. You guys, we're killing it. It's happening. Let's go. Let's move on to John chapter 8. Anybody want to take us through John 8? I keep asking. Yeah, Phil.
Phil's got it.
Let's
No,
go.
I just think John chapter 8, we're before the man born blind, but the issue is paternity. Like for me, I'm going to do John chapter 8, and it's going to be paternity test will be the title of my sermon, because it is all about paternity. It is, who is your father? Who is my father? You're doing what your father wants, the devil. Like paternity test. That's where I'm going with chapter 8 for sure.
Yeah, that's great. It's one of the funniest chapters in the whole Bible, right? I just think it's hilarious that the dialogue that at the end of the chapter that comes through about your father being the devil, and well, if your father, you're trying to murder me, so I feel like I know who your dad is. If you're trying to murder me, so
who's your daddy?
Who's your dad?
Who's your
I knew
daddy?
someone was going to say that. Yeah, there you go. There you go. Nobody is
Hey,
allowed.
can I say one quick thing about John 7?
Yes.
And I'm sorry, I'm walking the dog now. He was driving me crazy. Is that where Nicodemus makes his second appearance?
Yes, at the end of the chapter.
Okay, yeah. So there's some fun stuff you can do with Nicodemus. It doesn't quite fit as we go chapter to chapter, but you will see this slow progression of Nicodemus's. Maybe this is more for the quiet times, but you'll see the slow conversion of Nicodemus, where he's coming to him at night, and at 3 he's just not ready. 7 he's starting to stick up for Jesus, and he gets kind of blasted for doing so. And then I don't know if it's true conversion, but you see him, at the end there, taking Jesus from the cross.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's just something in there that I think is like really fun you can play with, though, just about how people need some people just need time. And another theme you see, I think he says in John 5 is, my father is always at work. And I preached about that last night. Like, God is working all throughout Cleveland. We just have no idea. Like, people are praying stuff like, help me God to find you. And like, God is always at work. And even when people walk away and we're discouraged after a Bible study, it's just part of the process. Don't give up.
Yeah.
Anyway, good sense.
No, that's great. Yeah, I kind of spoiled the Nicodemus thing last week because I used that in my conclusion from John 3 that we see him again, and that's really good. I like seeing it as a slow conversion, though. Okay, so back on John 8. So we've got the paternity test, and there's a few tests. Like, it starts out with this kind of courtroom drama, right, with the woman caught in adultery. And so I thought that there was just some different tensions here, like the tension between grace and truth, and Jesus is able to walk that tight wire every time. The woman needs both grace and truth. The people who want to stone her need to realize that they don't have the truth, and they need to have grace, and he's able to do that. And did you guys have any insights into, I know there's all kinds of speculation as to what Jesus wrote. That's one of the great mysteries in the Bible, when he kneeled down to write in the dirt. Any thoughts on that? I looked up a few things. So one thing, and if someone could take notes while I'm talking too, that'd be great. Otherwise, I can't talk and take notes. is he could have been writing like, so back then, and I think even today, judges, they write the ruling and then they speak the ruling. And so it could have been him kind of, writing out what he was going to say, which is whoever's without sin, cast the first stone. The other people thought that it's kind of like when you get down in the ground and do that, it's like a sign of distress. Jeremiah 17:13, I thought this was really cool. It says, turn away, those who turn away from God will be written in the earth. And then because they've forsaken the living water. And so if you go back to John chapter 7, living water and writing in the earth are both in Jeremiah 17. That's crazy. And then the other thing too is, we keep seeing like Jesus walks on the water like God, he doesn't go through it. And if we know one entity who wrote with his finger, that would be God writing the 10 commandments. And so there's, maybe even just as a list, you could say it could be any of these things, and kind of just blows people's minds to think of what could be happening. It's crazy that John doesn't explain. Like, I think Rusty keeps saying, why isn't John telling us more stuff? Why would you not tell us what he wrote? It's really crazy. So, and when we move from that to light and dark, again, as a theme, which we've had already a few times, major theme, we'll see it again, even in John chapter 9, but light and dark. So there's the tension between grace and truth. There's the tension between light and dark. And I think the question is like, with John 8, how do you know if you're being true, or you need truth, or if you need grace? Well, you got to go to the word. How do you know if you're in the light or you're in the dark? You got to go to the word. And that's what, John 8:32, that abide in my word. Abide is a sustenance word. That's you're being sustained by the word. And then it ends with the paternity test and he really challenged them, slave or free. And he's like, what makes you think you're free? And so when we think about that in our lives, like, I think that's a great question to ask the church. Are you enslaved right now, or are you free? How do you know? It goes back to the word. The word is the test. If we put it in Phil's language there, it always goes back to the word. And I love that they say they've never been slaves. I think we all have a narrative in our heads about our lives that may or may not be true to some degree. And their narrative was that they'd never been slaves, when they had been slaves of 3 different empires and currently were enslaved by the Roman Empire. And yet they saw themselves as free. Man, I think that's so
they
true.
do that a couple times with John, because even they're like, no prophet can come from Galilee, when they're badgering Nicodemus. And the truth is, Jonah was from Galilee.
Right. Yeah. They were missing some stuff. They needed Jesus. That's great. Okay, what else do we see in this chapter? What do you guys got?
I can go real quick. I'm about to pick up my son from school, but the theme of freedom stands out to me amongst everything, if I'm kind of connecting the story and his teaching. But this woman goes free in a way, but free to go and live differently.
Yeah, so good.
John Mark Comer talks a lot about, and there's a lot of research on what freedom really means. And you are free to make good decisions. When you're enslaved in your sin, you're not free to make those decisions. And so ultimate freedom isn't doing whatever you want, but it's free to live righteously is actually a freedom, to have the ability to decide. So that stands out to me in connecting those two stories. And then this is a little left field, but I think when I preach this passage, I plan on doing a narrative style preaching. And so telling the story from a Pharisee's perspective, one of the Pharisees at the stoning or the potential stoning, and the Pharisee that, a Pharisee that was there in the conversation later. And he's kind of like wrestling with what he saw and how angry he was at what Jesus said. And so not a main Pharisee. And I almost imagine him saying, I was trying to look over the shoulders to see what Jesus was writing, and I couldn't see, but it could have been this, or so-and-so said it was this, and so-and-so said it was that. And just kind of painting a picture. So different style. I don't do that very often, but just thought I floated out there as a possibility.
Bro, video proof or it doesn't count. I want to see that real bad. That's awesome. That's so cool. I love that. It is really cool just to try to put yourself in the room, like when we preach John 3, when Nicodemus is there and then Jesus says, "This is the verdict." And can you imagine looking in Jesus' eyes and you've come in the middle of the night, the candle lights are flickering, and he says, "Men love darkness." Like that had to just be a knife in Nicodemus's heart that never went away. So brutal. And I think that getting into the narrative, whether you do it as a performative piece, like James, which I can't wait to see, or just really just trying to get people to imagine this, is so valuable. So that's really good stuff, James.
Yeah, I like the idea of freedom as well. I think a lot of what I feel and I think, about kind of the Western idea of freedom, and we kind of fight for freedom, and we kind of hold freedom as the ultimate thing. Like, this is the greatest thing we can have. If we are free, therefore we can do this and this. And if we're not free, like we value that above all things sometimes, and obviously Jesus flips that around and says, where does freedom come from? It comes from obeying, abiding in the word, obeying my teachings, knowing the truth, then you'll be set free. And so I think we kind of flip our values there, and instead of valuing freedom above all things, we value abiding in God's word, the logos, as that word is used there. So I don't know. I like that idea.
Bro, that's solid. Really good. Any other thoughts on John 8? How we doing? We got a pretty good chunk here. Anything else? I think the challenge is, I guess I'll put this out there as a challenge for you guys. We John 8 is part of a lot of our study series. We preach John 8, probably actually a few of these chapters. And I just want to encourage you to do something different, really put the work in to come from a different perspective. Your church will appreciate that so much. You don't want to phone in these familiar chapters, Okay. We're going to move on to John chapter 9. I think we're doing good timing wise for this. Appreciate it. John 9. I'll run through this. I love John 9 because it is pretty much a whole chapter devoted to one story. And obviously it's the story of the man born blind. And you've probably preached this before. And so, but immediately I think of spiritual blindness. I think of the blind spots that are in our lives. One thing that stuck out to me is verse 3. It says Jesus answered, "It was not this man that sinned." Like they had that idea, like Luke 13, like why did the tower fall on these people? Because God gathered them so that they were all sinners, and God was like, "Oh, all the sinners are in one spot. Let's hit them with a tower." And Jesus was like, "No, but unless you repent, you too will perish." And here you see that same idea in Jewish thinking. Who sinned? Why is this man blind? And then Jesus says, no, it's not that. It's so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And I love that. It's like Jesus saying we're all a blank canvas. We've all got strengths and weaknesses. And God wants to use our strengths and our weaknesses to paint something beautiful, to display his power and his works, whether that's through good things that happen, bad things that happen, how we respond to bad things. It's clearly not fair that someone would be born blind. And yet God has a vision for all people, no matter what they're going through. And but we have to be able to see him if we're gonna live up to that. So those are some thoughts I had just off the bat with that. Any thoughts you guys have?
Yeah, just maybe for a real kind of outward focus, just the progression of the man from like a man, Jesus a man, Jesus a prophet, Jesus son of God. Just kind of maybe just for visitors to stress where they're at. A bit like I think Ryan was saying about the long conversion. It's quite a quick conversion in the sense that he gets this quite quickly, but just that progression wherever you're at, you're moving along, are you growing? Just a kind of call out to the visitors, those studying the Bible. Thought.
That's really good. It is really cool to see his own words as he's believing. Reminds me of the other healing with the man sees the trees. He's like, people are walking around like trees, and then Jesus touches him again. And sometimes we need multiple interactions to see more clearly. It's really good.
Yeah, there's a lot of just this man and the Pharisees, and at this point, the man is just healed. He didn't really know much about Jesus, and I think the testimony that he gives, especially in 31 to 33, is very powerful, because he's like, this is what Jesus, this is what I've seen. That has to be from God, because God, can only work in that way. It's just amazing, his testimony that got the Pharisees really mad, and he didn't even really know anything about Jesus. So it's like the power of just that act alone. And then, later you see him believing in Jesus. But I just think it's cool to see his testimony, and you see how the Pharisees, they were becoming blind. As he was being able to see, they were becoming blind, because their arguments became less and less convincing, and they were just angry and mad. And they were like, what about, they had some questions. Then they're just like, you were steeped in sin at birth, like that didn't make sense. How dare you lecture us? And so I just think there's a lot of things that we don't see. They refuse to see what was right in front of them. But some of the things that they did see caused them to be blind. Some of the things that the rules and the laws and the things that they put in place caused them to become spiritually blind. They're like, he's breaking the Sabbath. How can he break the Sabbath? Did Jesus break the Sabbath? What does that mean? How did they define the Sabbath? How did they define all these things? They defined God to be something different than he was, and Jesus, the Messiah, to be something different than he was.
Yeah, that's really good.
So it causes us to become spiritually blind, when we.
Yep, love it. Yeah, I think another thing I see is in 9:39, he says the blind will see, and that fits with there's a lot of scriptures about that, but Luke 4, that's like his mission, Jesus' mission statement from Isaiah 42, that the blind will see. And so one thing I think is, as Christians and the people in our churches, we should be seeing more and more of God and not less and less. And I think that you kind of talked about that, Carl, like the Pharisees had a narrowing view of God, and Jesus is there to illuminate and for us to see more God. One thing I thought, Ephesians 1:15 too, Paul prays for the Ephesian church to have a heart with eyes. It's such an incredible prayer. But I think maybe the recipe card for this one could be like a spiritual eye exam. More, it gets off the metaphor a little bit. But like what does it look like to be blind spiritually, and what does it look like to see spiritually? I think like one thing is just admitting that we have blind spots is one area. Being open, curious, letting like having, like what you talked about, Carl, a relationship, not the rules, but the relationship, letting other people into the light, things like that. So I don't know if that's a good thing to brainstorm, but what'd you have, Phil?
Well, just to connect with what you're saying, if we're going to keep the theme, I know it's hard. I don't want to press too hard on the theme, but nose blind, like you don't know when something's gone bad. Yeah. Like milk is like, imagine if you don't, like you grab a bad milk out of the fridge and you don't know, and you're like, oh, and you just start drinking sour milk. Of course, if you're nose blind or whatever blind, you're going to be like, this seems fine. And then, 3 hours later, you're throwing up. But so I just thought that may be a way to connect with the theme. Again, not to press too hard on the theme, but it might be a worthwhile illustration.
Yeah, it's memorable already. Especially, yeah, and that was the thing with COVID. People lost their sense of smell and sense of taste. And that was a problem. That turned out to be a little bit of a problem. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Cool. Any other thoughts on this spiritual blindness chapter? Okay, cool. Let's move on to our last one here, John 10. We're doing it, guys. If we do this in 90 minutes, we get 5 sermons prepped. What's happening? What the Spirit is like living water. We're on the river right now. We're racing the rapids. The Holy Spirit. It's a wind. Let's go. All right. All right. So John chapter 10, the Good Shepherd. This again, I just want to urge us. We've preached this. We've heard this preached. Our people have heard this preached. How are we gonna make it fresh? Go deeper. Don't make it fresh just for the sake of making it fresh, but let's go deeper. Some of the stuff I read about with it is the thief and the robber. Sounds redundant, 2 different things. A thief breaks in, a robber kind of waits by the roadside. And then it seems like Jesus is talking about 2 different kinds of sheep pens. The first 7 verses, it talks about the robber and the thief will climb over the walls. And so that's a high walled, taller than a person kind of pen. And then later on, it sounds like he's talking more about the kind of pen and it is, I think, legitimate. It's not just a cool guidepost story that the shepherd would sit in front of the door and be the door. But that's a different kind of sheep pen where the shepherd could be the gate for the sheep. And there's obviously a lot about I think there's easy connections do we know his voice? He knows us. And even Jesus has proven that when he sees Peter, he says, "You are Peter." He knows Peter's name. He sees Nathaniel, he knows Nathaniel's name. And now he's saying, he says that the shepherd knows his sheep. And the question is, do we know his voice? And this goes back to the theme of influencers and all that. What other voices are we listening to? Who else are we listening to? And then I think I mentioned this earlier, but just making he says in 10:16 that he wants to bring the sheep in, and that's because when the flock is together, they're safer. They're less likely to be eaten by wolves or stolen. And so that's the place, not where we're listening to all these outside voices, but in the flock, in church, in our house churches, from the pulpit, all the things. And then obviously the abundant life, and you can get a little too Joel Osteen with that abundant life stuff, but I don't think we got any health and wealth guys here, so we should be okay. And then at the end of the chapter, and I think you could leave 22 and on. He talks more about sheep there as well, but it is a different time. This is a different festival. He's back for Hanukkah. That's the Feast of Dedication. It's winter, but he's still talking about sheep. So it could fit. I thought one thing that's interesting is he's talks about Solomon's colonnade. He talks about the flock, and he's in Solomon's colonnade. Acts 5 verse 12, Solomon's colonnade is the place where the flock, the very first flock, the church that would come from Jesus' body, it's where they meet in that very spot. So little connection there. So what do you guys got from this? Fresh insights. I'm seeing the word seleucids. I like that in the notes.
I like one, was it one flock, one shepherd, this is what Jesus was trying to do was bring people to him. He said he's the gate. Only through him, even going to the Samaritans, these are God's people. God, and then later the Gentiles, these are God's people. One flock. This is what Jesus wants to do, is to unite people in him. One kingdom, one flock, one Lord, one Savior. So I like that. And then talking about this I mean, we've seen a lot of the kind of conflicts, and the people are divided over what they believe or don't believe, you know, and I just think about sometimes we can be divided in, you know, okay, I like this about Jesus, I don't like this, or I want to follow this, I don't want to follow that. And I just go, well, why? You know, is it because you don't want a shepherd? You know, were people divided because they didn't want a shepherd? They wanted to be their own, lead their own life, or they just don't want to listen, you know, or maybe there was something that they were unable to see or let go of, you know, for them to be led by Jesus. And I just think about, you know, for us, you know, again, kind of maybe that same, like, do we want to like have our own recipe? I don't want to listen to the expert who has this recipe. I want to do my own thing, and it's a big disaster, and it tastes terrible, and it, you know, whatever it is. But kind of you know, and at the end talking about, you know, John, you know, again, I agree with John, and
All
he
right.
didn't perform a sign. All he said was Jesus is true, you know, like that's all he did. So
that's great. Yeah, that's really good. I think I'm getting like nailed it vibes from that, Carl. Like when people can't follow the recipe, it does not. You nailed it. It's not looking good. We want more of like a Great British Bake Off kind of vibe, right, Mulligan? That's what we need. So good. Why are they in a tent? Why aren't they in a kit? I don't understand that. But anyway, who knows? Why bake in a tent? Anyway, yeah, I think the other thing too is in verse 9, he talks about being saved. Like he uses the word saved. And we're saved from thieves, robbers, and wolves. And I think that's real. Like we got to see that we are, you know, we think about being saved, you know, going to heaven, being saved from our sin. But we're actually, when we're with the flock and when Jesus is the voice that we're listening to, we're being saved from danger in this world. And I think the evidence of that, like, are you saved, is the next verse is where's your joy? If something's stealing your joy, if you're walking into church hunched over, you got to think like, is it because I'm listening to voices that I shouldn't be listening to, or I'm a part of a flock that I shouldn't be a part of? Do I need to be saved so I can have this joy that Jesus talks about? So I like the connection between salvation and abundant joy and life.
Hey, I would just throw in, as you're talking about the wolves, thieves, robbers, might be good just to drill down on who are the wolves, thieves, and robbers, because it seems like, and it feels like these days, as leaders, we're being called the wolves. And it's just a perspective, like, you know, we're trying to, you know, keep the shepherd in play, you know, in the pen, and to direct, and sometimes you have to you know, correct and guide and redirect, and people just you know, people are really stuffing up their ears towards that. And so I think discernment is probably the words. Like people just need more discernment today of who really are the wolves, because right now it just seems like people are really confused on that. So
yeah, I mean, and it's so amazing that just how, you know, and we have this word influencer, but just how much influence that people have access to now. It used to be, you know, your church that you went to, everybody reading the same newspaper, and now it's just, there's just so much that we really do need to be better curators of the information we let in, the voices that we're listening to, for sure. That's really good. Okay, any more thoughts on the Good Shepherd as we start to wrap up here before we give some assignments out?
Yeah, I have just a quick thought here. One, I don't know where the reference is, so I'm not following my own rule here. I'll have to look it up. But I've read that, sorry, I'm outside, but that the gate is, the shepherd would lie in the front of like the sheep pen at night, because there wouldn't be a gate, and he would make this kind of C with like the letter C with sticks and things like that, and he would literally lie in the front to protect people from the sheep from the wolves. And it's interesting that he says, I'm the gate. not only do you have to come through him, but that he is the first, he takes all the hits from the world around, he basically is the sacrificial shepherd in that. And then we're doing a singles retreat, and we're doing the I am statements in basically conjunction with this. And one of the activities we're going to have for I am the Good Shepherd is do like a little exercise on hearing the voice of God, which maybe sounds it's interesting to study out. Dallas Willard has some interesting stuff out there about hearing God, but we might do some Lectio Divina, which is kind of an old school act of meditation and hearing the word of God. So it might be something different if you feel like your church is saturated with John 10 or Hey, I'm the Shepherd, just as far as an exercise, something about listening to the voice of God could be a cool exercise, because he talks about, I know the sheep, they know my voice.
Yeah.
So.
I think that's so cool. So that would be a great prescription for this one, would be to teach or even just put a video out there of what Lectio Divina is like, and any paragraph in John would be fantastic to use for that that kind of reading. So very cool. Yeah, Mulligan.
Just one more, yeah. Just I don't know if it's a chiastic thing, but the middle of this chapter seems just to kind of 17 and 18 for me, where it's like just the laying down of his life, just that kind of central piece of the chapter where and the willingness, like the idea that, we often say this in the cross study, you hold that out, and I normally hold it out right to the end, and it was his choice, this was like, he could have, called 10,000 angels, and that it really spells it out so clearly. John just really, like, no one takes it from me. I lay it down of my own accord. Just that willingness, just the willingness. It's just a challenge to my heart to be, to want to serve, not out of just raw obedience or just graft, but out of this. Well, this pulls me. Wow, I willingly want to do it because Jesus willingly did it for me. So I think that's just such a cool kind of central piece. And I don't know if it is a chiasm, but it's such a.
Another bingo square just got hit with chiasm. Good job. So good. Yeah, I think that, and that fits with what James was saying and what we said about the gate. Like he talks about being the gate, and then he mentions laying down. And I did read that in a legit commentary, James, so I'll add that in at some point in the document. It's not just it's not like a camel through the eye of the needle, old wives' tale. It's really what shepherds did. So yeah, Phil.
So I think if you're talking about verse 9 and 10, which you alluded to, it's what we're saved from. I think I love the language in verse 10 instead of using even the word joy, because he's foreshadowing what happens because in chapter 11 he's literally going to raise Lazarus from the dead, and and the promise in chapter 10 is, I'm here to give life and give it to the full. And of course, this chapter, by the time we get to the end of John, they have to clear up the rumor that this guy won't ever die. Maybe it's because Lazarus has already been resurrected once.
Yeah. That's so good. Isn't it crazy that they want to kill Lazarus after he gets resurrected? Anyway, I think that's in chapter 12. It's like, what is going on? So crazy. I think that's really good. That's a really good foreshadowing. And the cool thing, so if you're preaching on schedule, or you take the off days, which there'll be another one here, my plan is for Easter to preach John 11, and so we're preaching resurrection, Lazarus on Easter. It all fits, it all makes sense. And then so our next session will be going through I think, yeah, it'll be a bigger one, but maybe we'll break it up into two. But it's hard to break it up because there really is a chiasm with John 13 through 18. So we'll figure all that out. But for now, this is such good stuff. For assignments, you guys, I know some people have already signed up for some of these sermons to be the Tuesday sermon delivery person. Thank you for that. If you haven't yet, get signed up to be that. If you get your sermon done earlier, you get it done on Thursday. If there's already a sermon put up there, put your sermon up too. We're all learning from each other. We're not stealing from each other. We're using this as platforms to jump off and make sermons of our own. as God moves us and as our churches need, different things. So with that, some assignments, I'll do the graphics for this. Did those worked? The PowerPoint graphics worked, the template, it's good. Okay. And then I'll keep doing the daily devotionals. I agree with John's my website. And so I want the daily devotionals to come from me. I know it's weird, but so I'll keep doing those. And then what can you guys do? What can you do to help with this?
I'm just pulling up the spreadsheet to see where the planning is.
One thing we didn't have is we don't have anybody making Facebook and Instagram posts, but if we had like a scripture, like a verse highlighted for each chapter, like John 10:10, the week before or after, with sheep in the background or something like if somebody could put that out, throw it on GroupMe, put it in the folder, that would be really helpful. I don't know if anybody feels called to do something like that each week, but just makes your church look like it's like you're doing stuff. Hitting above our weight class.
Can I who will use those materials? If they are made, who's gonna use them? Because if I make them, I'll certainly use them. I know that. But is that something that you think will be helpful for you guys as groups?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Would it be helpful to have a church invite graphic for this theme?
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Especially because we're coming into Easter.
Yeah. I think the Jesus diet it's really easy to share. It's a catchy thing. Like, hey, we're talking about the Jesus diet. Everyone wants to talk about diets. And so, yeah. So does somebody want to make PowerPoint or Facebook?
I can do that stuff for this round.
Okay. And then, just real general, like just a scripture, but with there'll be like a logo for it that'll come on the other graphics. And then we can, Phil, do you want to make an invite graphic?
I'll give my very best.
Okay. Or get somebody to do it and then put it on there. Okay. And then we'll just keep signing up for the things. I think that's it.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah, sure.
Can we go ahead and lock in who's responsible for each Tuesday sermon for this series while we're here on the call? I think that would be better.
Okay.
Than hoping that it happens and then us not getting it done until later.
All right. Yeah, we can do that. I'm going to shut the recording down real quick and then we can do that.
Okay, cool.